I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. You know, something big happened in the Portland area today, something that will likely impact you no matter where you live around here, because eventually you're gonna fly. The long-awaited new main terminal opened up at Portland International Airport, and it is spectacular. And it's our big story tonight. David Moko is live at Portland International tonight. I know you've had a chance to look around. What do you think?
Yeah, I can't stop looking up or down or at these video walls. There's a Mount Hood at sunset right now over there. They change based on the scenes and time of days. Pat, I have to tell you, this is something we can all be proud of, right? $2 billion, a decade in the making, 30,000 workers, local people putting this together. You know, the sense of the outdoors inside, the trees, the soaring timber roof, 9 acres of that, by the way, sourced from indigenous tribes within a 300-mile radius in Oregon and Washington. I mean, we talked to one of, a member of the Yakama Nation. You'll hear from him a little bit later in the show. It is just stunning, and it's day one. Exciting would be the word, and you don't have to take just my word for it. Here's some of what we heard today.
It's got a real Oregon feel to it with the trees and the timbered roof or ceiling and all that, and I just think it's beautiful. Yeah, I'm really happy to see it all done.
Honestly, the ceilings are beautiful. I mean, we feel almost outdoors.
Yeah, because there used to be like choke points before, but now it's just way more open. Everyone can just kind of walk around and do their own thing too.
Yeah, it feels very Northwest, right? 400 flights a day, 50,000 plus passengers a day. They're gearing up right now. I think we're about 20,000 passengers a year arrive or depart through PDX. They're looking toward 2045 when that number could climb till 35 million, really future-proofing, but also instilling a sense of the Northwest. This is the future, but I know our viewers at The Story love talking about the past and digging into the vault. So let's take a journey back in time. The history of the Portland Airport, and by the way, it wasn't called that, and it actually was not here, begins in the 1920s. Tim Gordon takes us back in a time machine.
Portland International Airport has come a long way to where it is today. But did you know Portland's first airport was on Swan Island from 1927 to 1940. Even though it only lasted for 13 years, it began with a big event.
Who flew in to officially open it? Charles Lindbergh, the American hero who was semi-fresh back from his cross-Atlantic Ocean flight.
Yes, Lindbergh and the spirit of St. Louis came to kick off Portland's airport history. But as the city grew and aviation modernized, land for a new, bigger airport was purchased in 1936 along the Columbia River. Then there was a lot of work to do, says the Oregon Historical Society's Carrie Timchuk.
Massive 3 or 4 million cubic yards of stuff to fill in the river there to make the airport. To stabilize it.
About half the $3 million cost to infill land and build the new airport came from FDR's Works Project Administration, the big effort to lift America out of the Great Depression. By 1940, the new airport was complete.
The original name of the airport was the Portland Columbia Airport. And it didn't become Portland International until 1951. With the first international flights.
One thing about airports, they're always changing and growing. The original terminal was replaced in 1959 by a new terminal set between 2 long parallel runways constructed earlier that decade.
This is Portland's newest, Portland's finest.
The new PDX was documented in a KGW News special that showed off the features of the improved airport.
Inside this modern edifice, the main passenger lobby is the very picture of spaciousness. From here where we are to the far wall at the end of the lobby is a distance of some 500 feet, nearly 2 city blocks.
As time moved on, some airlines came and went. PDX used to have Pan Am's 747 service to London. That had to be a sweet flight. All along, the airport has been a place where history is made.
KGW News presents a study of Senator Robert F. Kennedy.
With news crews there to document the arrival of important figures like RFK on a presidential campaign stop here in 1968. Of course, it's also where presidents land on Air Force One this century, from George W. Bush to the most recent visit by President Joe Biden. Terminal expansions and improvements have dotted the most recent decades. A new FAA control tower, parking garage, and the glass canopy that keeps us dry coming and going. put in 1999, have all added to the experience. Then there's the much-loved PDX carpet that became the centerpiece of so many travelers' foot selfies. Originally installed in 1988, it was mostly replaced in 2015, but still holds a special spot in many hearts, and at the Oregon Historical Society Museum.
And one of the items in it is a piece of the carpet, the iconic PDX carpet that has gone viral for so many years.
All that to go with the food and the shopping. Even the music has earned Portland International Airport some of the highest marks from travelers in numerous surveys. And now a new terminal, the latest milestone at PDX.
And it looks like it's a beauty, so I think it'll help keep Portland on top of the rankings of the most user-friendly airports.
Tim Gordon, KGW News.
You know, in many ways, carrying on a tradition, in so many others, a game changer. So excited for the future here and what this means for Portland. Let's talk more about that roof. 9 acres, 18 million pounds, all dug first, sourced within 300 miles through partnerships with 4 tribes in Oregon and Washington. What is so inspiring is that it's sustainably grown and harvested. For example, there's a tribe in southern Oregon. They were cleaning up from a 2019 wildfire. The logs that they salvaged are the wood that found its way here. You know, I talked to Steve Rigdon with the Yakima Indian Reservation in Washington. He's been involved in this project from the start. He pointed out the beams that hold this thing up that are from his tribe's lands, and he talked about what this means to him.
You live your life as wanting to have purpose, and this is a beyond a lifetime, legacy accomplishment that gives you purpose, that generations from 100 to 150 years, we talk about our 7th generations, and having them witness something so spectacular, so iconic. This is one of the Northwest modern day cathedrals, and to be a part of that and contribute to it is a beautiful thing.
What's it like to know that the wood from your tribal land is literally holding this place up?
It's amazing.
Yeah, Steve adding there, his ancestors going back generations would be proud that this is the way collaboration is supposed to work. You know, some sections like the one above me have single origin stories. You can pinpoint where the wood actually came from. Look for kind of markers to go up in the next month or so, kind of like a hiking trail, giving you the origin story of the roof overhead. All right, before we go here, Pat, a quick reality check. Yes, it is still an airport. Yes, there will be lines at security. Yes, check-in will not be perfect. Yes, there will be bad weather days. Yes, it will not be perfect. But this is a great start. Phase 2 coming in 2026, early 2026. You're going to look at a hopefully spiffed up baggage hall, new carpet, new exits, 10 more shops and restaurants opening. If this is the beginning, this is a great start.
Yeah,
Pat?
It's so good to hear, David. I can't wait to get out there and see it myself. Thanks for all that. Appreciate it. Coming up next on The Story, we're diving into Oregon's infrastructure report card. The airport upgrade certainly does help, but what about things like bridges and dams? Overall, the state earned a passing grade, but not by much. We'll highlight some of the big issues with a bit of positivity sprinkled in when The Story returns. Since we spent so much time on the Portland airport, we thought, you know what, this would be a great chance for a deep dive on a report looking at Oregon's infrastructure. It's like a report card on airports and dams and bridges and water systems and a whole lot more. Civil engineers, the folks who design those things, check up on how the systems are doing, and then they let the rest of us know. Here's a spoiler alert. In Oregon, the systems are doing sort of okay. Not exactly a glowing review here. Engineers say the entire system needs lots more money to make it support itself and to make it stronger. And by the way, they're looking at you and me as the source of that money. Surprise. Greg DiLoretto is an engineer and until 2013 was CEO of the Tualatin Valley Water District. In the past, he's helped write and promote these national report cards on infrastructure. Recently, he introduced the report card for Oregon.
I want to emphasize, this report is a reflection on the systems we have in place and their current and expected ability to withstand external stressors, such as increases in energy demands, population growth, increasingly severe weather, and shifting traffic patterns, which are factors we are seeing impact almost every state in our nation.
Here in Oregon, our overall infrastructure got a grade of C-. That's what the rest of the country got as well. So not great, but also not awful. I mean, it's just sort of bad. Here's one of the authors of the report.
Oregon's decades of population growth. As more people have moved to Oregon due to the high quality of life we have here, some infrastructure systems are now being asked to accommodate surging usage. This means that more people are on our roads and our bridges and relying on our water systems than they were initially designed for. Oregon's infrastructure is also showing signs of the consequences of decades of deferred maintenance. This is because we have been kicking the proverbial can down the road about fixing and maintaining our infrastructure. Despite recent efforts to address this, our infrastructure is still under immense strain.
All right, well, let's get into this. The report is brought to us by the Oregon section of the American Society of Civil Engineers. They looked at 12 different areas from aviation to wastewater treatment systems and found, well, lots of reasons for concern. As I mentioned, they gave Oregon overall a C-. We don't have time to run through each one, but let's take a look at a few of the areas where the engineers focused. Since we've been to Portland's airport, let's start with aviation. The airports combined also scored a C-. And here's something I found interesting. Oregon has 97 different airports. I don't know if you knew that. The biggest is PDX, of course, but there are a lot of small ones all around the state. And engineers, being who they are, well, they wanted to check the conditions of the runway and the pavement at all the airports, at least all those controlled by the Oregon Department of Aviation. And what they found is that 83% were either in good, satisfactory, or fair condition. The other 17%? Well, let's just hope your plane's not landing there. Other challenges, only 36 airports can store fuel, and with wildfires becoming more common, the engineers say another 20 airports should start storing fuel for firefighting planes. 16 public airports are located along the coast, and 10 are in tsunami zones. So if the big quake happens and the tsunami follows, they're not going to be much good to the rest of us. Moving on, let's go to bridges. The engineers gave Oregon bridges a C- as well. That's down from a solid C a few years ago. But, you know, there is some good news.
About 5% of Oregon's bridges are now in poor condition, which is lower than the national average.
Well, how about that? That is some great news indeed. Our bridges are doing okay, but at least they're not as bad as the rest of the country, right?
However, the age of our bridges across the state presents a serious problem down the road. Already, more than half of the bridges in Oregon are more than 50 years old and are approaching the end of their design life.
For crying out loud. There it is. I knew that was too good to be true. Oregon has 8,292 bridges, another surprising number, and roughly 22% of them are considered in poor or almost poor condition. Most of them are on the left side of this graph, which shows that they're 50 years old or older. The Oregon Department of Transportation reports that each year only 3 new bridges are built to replace the outdated bridges. So, of course, the engineers got their calculators out and punched in the numbers, and they figured out at that rate, an Oregon bridge would need to remain in service for 900 years until it's replaced. That's a big problem because typically they only last 75 to 100 years. The engineers agree with ODOT, by the way, that the state needs to make a change and connects the gas tax to the rate of inflation to keep enough money flowing into the agency to keep up with the bridges and maybe fix more every year. ODOT also wants several other funding sources for its struggling budgets that we've told you about before. Tolls, anyone? Anyway, let's move on to the dams. Oregon has a bunch of those as well, 889 to be exact, and the engineers gave them a D+ grade, so that's not good. Our source for how they're doing, the Army Corps of Engineers, which has a national inventory of the 90,000 dams that are standing across the U.S. Here's what it has to show for Oregon. Let's start with all those little red dots there. Well, those are dams, 171 of them, with the potential for high hazard and loss of life if they fail. Now, 28 of those are rated as poor or unsatisfactory. Another 171 pose a significant hazard if they fail, and 547 are low hazard dams in Oregon. The good news is that Oregon has slightly improved funding for safety regulations on the existing dams and started an emergency action plan for the 76 dams that are regulated by the state and considered high hazard. The rest of those 171 that I mentioned earlier are not regulated by the state. Also, most of the big federally regulated or owned dams are in satisfactory or fair condition. So that's good news. Now, the bad news. In the next 5 years, 70% of Oregon's dams will be older than 50 years, which is their expected lifetime. 98 of those dams in Oregon are twice that, more than 100 years old right now. I found that amazing. The report says none are prepared for something like the big Cascadia earthquake, by the way. Finally, let's move to water and wrap up on a high-ish note. Our water gets a C grade, so passing.
More than 99% of Oregon's drinking water systems meet the Environmental Protection Agency standards for safe drinking water. Water systems in Oregon generally have stable supplies and are capable of handling future growth. Much of Oregon's drinking water network is relatively new compared to other parts of our country, with most lines installed over the last 50 years. This is really good news for us, as water utilities face new rules that will require the removal of lead service lines.
So let's cling to that good news. The EPA estimates only 3,500 water lines in Oregon are made from lead. That's less than 1% of all the water lines in the state. That's good. Lead in the water is bad. And they point to projects like this, the Washington Park Reservoir replacement in Portland. The original reservoir was built back in 1894. The new one is replacing it with a 12 million gallon seismically reinforced underground reservoir. It's expected to be finished by the spring of 2025. It's going to cost $211 million. Overall, the engineers issuing the report card say Oregon needs to pony up a lot more money to keep the water clean. Just the water, they say, needs $10 billion. How about that? So there you go. That's just part of Oregon's infrastructure report card. You can dive into the entire thing yourself if you'd like, all 137 pages. We have a link in this story on kgw.com. Coming up next on The Story, part one of a three-part series this week focused on orcas in the Pacific Northwest. Tonight we focus on how we got here, from the gruesome captures in the Puget Sound from decades past to where current population numbers stand. That's coming up next when The Story returns. Tonight and the rest of this week, our Environment Northwest team has a series of special reports focused on the southern resident killer whales in our region. NOAA says they're teetering on the edge of extinction with a rapidly declining population. One of our series focuses on what has happened in the past 50 years here in Part 1 and leading us to how we got here. Here's Drew Andre.
Your heartbeat, your family's heartbeat, our heartbeat.
Facing the Sailor Sea, Lummi tribal elder Raynell Morris uses this beach near Ferndale, Washington to connect with her ancestors.
We love you. We know you're starving. We hear you.
To the Laktamish people, southern resident killer whales are family.
So what happens to them happens to us. They're starving for salmon. We're starving for salmon. They're unhealthy because of the water. And now we're at an all-time point of extinction for them as a population, as a people, as our relatives.
The species is made up of 3 families, J, K, and L pods. L pod, the largest family, has 34 orcas. J pod includes 25, and K has just 15 as of this year. The decline in numbers began in the 1960s, when southern residents were picked out of the waters of Puget Sound. Some of the first organized captures were led by Ted Griffin and his team from the Seattle Public Aquarium.
It was completely legal. There were permits issued.
Capturers corralled the orcas with speedboats and even bombs, ensnaring some in nets. From the 60s to mid-70s, hundreds of whales were captured in Washington and British Columbia waters.
But the southern residents, in terms of number of whales and the impact on the population, were really hit the hardest.
At least 11 died in the process, and 36 were taken into captivity at marine parks. Specifically, young orcas, including Tokate. By 1987, known as Lolita at the Miami Seaquarium, she was already the only survivor of the orcas taken from Puget Sound.
Because those captures weren't random, because they were targeted at young individuals, it's not that a third of the population is randomly removed, it's that a generation is removed.
Dr. Michael Weiss's team at the Center for Whale Research started tracking the southern resident population in 1976. Researchers roughly estimate there could have been 120 before the captures began, but by 1976, 71 orcas remain.
And it really took a Washington state level bit of legislation to say that there would be no more killer whale captures within the state.
Slowly, the southern resident population rebounded, all the way up to 98 by 1994. Because for a time, their food supply, Chinook salmon, was plentiful. But Chinook stock has declined for decades. Some populations have decreased by as much as 90% since the early 20th century. Chinook were classified as endangered in 1994.
So you've got one endangered species relying on another endangered species to survive.
The southern residents received that distinction in 2005. This not only protects the taking of orcas, but puts policies in place to encourage conservationism. As many organizations have joined Morris and the Lummi tribe in trying to save the Northwest's beloved whales.
We don't have any more time. It's now. It's that urgent, that critical. It has to happen now.
And it's so urgent because there are other human-caused factors that are preventing the southern residents from thriving. Tomorrow, we explore the impact of pollutants and the other challenges that the orcas face today. For Environment Northwest, I'm Drew Andre.
Thanks, Drew. Also tomorrow, we'll hear from researchers working to diagnose and treat southern resident orcas before wrapping up our series on Friday with a look at what could happen if the species goes extinct. Hopefully that won't happen. I've been kayaking up there, had a pod swim right at us. It was spectacular. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, that never ends. I'll be taking the next 2 days off, but I will return on Monday. In the meantime, you'll be in great hands tomorrow and Friday. The team has some incredible content lined up for you. In the meantime, the good stuff's coming your way next. Have a great night.